We have high expectations of schools in educating our children. Many believe it starts with a safe and supportive place for learning. That includes some form of discipline. I'm LaTanya Turner. Currently in Tennessee, school discipline ranges from timeout to zero tolerance, suspensions, even corporal punishment, which is still legal in this state and 21 others. What type of school discipline is effective? Are there long-term consequences to some approaches? Are schools disciplining and implementing discipline in a way that is fair? We opened the NPT studio to a volunteer audience of parents, educators, and experts so we can have a discussion today about school discipline. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to spend about the next hour talking about school discipline in our area. And you know, there's so much going on in the contemporary world around us that impacts how you discipline in school. What are the characteristics that you think of when you think of discipline that is effective? What are the characteristics of effective discipline? Anyone?
Use words rather than hitting.
Words rather than hitting.
Suspension or expulsion should be a last resort.
Okay.
One of the primary traits of effective discipline is consistency. It needs to be each educator and administrative staff needs to know what to do each time, and each child needs to know that if they transgress the rules, they are going to be punished, and it is going to be the exact same for everyone.
So teacher one can't do one thing and then the teacher down the hall is doing something else. That's what you mean by consistency.
Right, like if you have a teacher's pet, you know, that teacher is not going to discipline that child and might decide, take a disliking to some other child in the classroom and be more harsh.
Okay. So we have words, consistency. Yes, sir.
The most effective discipline is the kind that prevents the behavior from happening in the first place. So the way we structure our classrooms, the way we support students can really diminish the behavior, and that way when we're responding to the behavior, we're also problem solving. So whatever the problem is, it's solved and the problematic behavior doesn't continue.
Okay. Since you've just spoken, this is Daniel Lowson. He is a special guest who's joining us today, and he is the director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies, which is an initiative of the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Dan has done a lot of research on school discipline. So since you have the floor, let's go ahead and talk to you a little bit about your research. What have you learned?
So we've been looking at these issues of racial inequity in education and discipline since 1999. And there are many underlying factors that contribute to what has been a really huge increase in the use of suspensions since the early 70s. So it's just not the case that we used to, kick out kids right and left. And the changes were informed by a combination of fear, ignorance, and lack of resources. So there was a fear of the war on drugs, and that, our schools would go out of control the same way people are experiencing problems in the streets. So they brought in some of the crime enforcement policies like broken windows, where the idea was to enforce every rule to the hilt. The problem with that is we're treating children like prospective criminals rather than prospective presidents. The other thing is the ignorance. A lot of times people thought this would work, that it would be effective, and not realizing also the huge costs that when we kick students out of school, it sets in motion a whole set of repercussions and makes it much more likely they'll drop out, become involved in the juvenile justice system. The best antidote to gang violence is school engagement.
Can I ask you a question? Did some of this also stem from a movement or a desire to move away from physical discipline?
So
spankings?
There has been a decline in corporal punishment, but what we found in our latest research on corporal punishment is that the schools that are hitting kids more are also suspending kids much more often.
Okay, you mentioned that there's been a decline in corporal punishment. We do have a map of corporal punishment in the United States, and you can see the darker, redder colors are where corporal punishment is greater by percentage of students who receive corporal punishment. Is there anyone that wants to comment on the use of corporal punishment in Tennessee?
When I think of corporal punishment, I think, why? Why would we instill violence and have that be an answer? I think reason and reasoning are the most effective tools.
Okay.
And social emotional learning, which we're working with in our school district.
Thank you, Norma. Does it surprise you that in some parts of Tennessee, parents still are asked to allow the school to discipline their children in a physical way in Tennessee?
My name is Polly, and I'm a student at Glencliff High School. I'm part of the Peace team. So for me, with corporal punishment, I didn't know that was still going on. Like, I had no clue at all, because I was born and raised here, and I've went to like 3 schools my entire life. So I've never heard of corporal punishment on any of my schools, and I think that's best, because with corporal punishment, it makes me, I feel like with students, if we get physically hit or something like that, and with violence, it causes more violence, because they're so used to that mentality and everything, and so they bring that mentality with them everywhere they go. So corporal punishment shouldn't be allowed. It's not right. We're all human beings. We shouldn't be hitting each other or doing all these other weird things. That's not right.
I actually think that corporal punishment can be an effective measure. If you have if you have a child in your classroom who is hitting other children, then I think that corporal punishment is the exact same measure that ought to be used against them. And
Define
frankly,
corporal punishment in your view.
well, that was what I was about to say, that most people here are saying, well, I never had corporal punishment. It must be the most horrible thing that ever happened to anybody. I was actually administered 3 smacks of the paddle, and you know what? I'm still here. And I have no desire to hit any of you.
Well, as you see in the map, corporal punishment is more common here. I mean, raise your hand if you ever got a paddle in school. I have to ask if anyone here can address what corporal punishment, what the roots are, because I think that's an important factor about historically how this country has used, well, whippings. Let's just call it what it is. Yes.
I think looking at the map you showed of the states that use corporal punishment, obviously the vast majority of those are in, I think we consider the Bible Belt. My humble opinion, I think a lot of that stems from a religious view, where many folks believe that spare the rod, spoil the child. And some religions take the rod as being a physical, rod. So to me, I don't know how we can justify trying to change the behavior of a young person who hits someone by hitting them.
A lot of times we just have a call a thing what it is. There's 2 cultures involved here. We've got the slave culture. We've got southern states where it was just a order of business to whip your own property. He hit it right on the nail too with the next culture we're talking about is a religious culture that people have adopted into their homes. And these cultures have mixed, and people have adopted this philosophy in their households. Now we've got a school system, if you go anti-corporal punishment, that conflicts with the household, that will not spare the rod. So we've got an interesting thing in terms of how do you change the cultures, but even further, now we have a culture that's so embracing of a violent coping mechanism in terms of how we deal with conflict is through violence, and then that violence shows up at the school level. And we as a community have got to come up with some better coping skills in terms of how do we deal with this violence, because it's not just or fair to drop it at the school or the door and expect the school to solve this for us.
Okay.
The paddle itself is documented as a tool of the slave master, because when you whip a slave, it left marks. But using the paddle, and we have documented, firsthand documents that shows that this was a conscious intent to not harm the property and to develop the paddle instead of the whip. There are many districts where only black children are hit. So you have to really think about what is really going on here. There aren't many districts where only black kids are suspended, but there are certainly those where only black kids are being hit. The other thing about punishment is that the whole notion that punishment somehow works is not problem solving in any way, shape, or form. So the idea that we have to either kick kids out so the good kids can learn, it's also informed by a lack of resources. If you don't have enough resources to take kids as they come, which is the charge of public schools, and really provide the kids who need more support, the support that they are entitled to, then you get into this mentality. And what are the kinds of districts that have been starved of resources are predominantly those serving poor and minority kids. And so there is an overlap of these things that we have to, I think, also address.
And I think it's also important to point out, we've talked about corporal punishment and suspensions, but there's like a continuum, really, of types of punishment. I mean, in-school suspension, seclusion, physical restraint. With all those types of discipline that are used, who is being disciplined? Dan, you touched on it, but we have a graphic also that shows about race and discipline. You see where the black students are in percentage of enrollment. And notice how much it's changed. And in all categories, students of color are being suspended more often.
These are the numbers of students who were suspended at least one time. So actually the data, if you were to look at suspensions per 100 or the days of missed instruction, we're really seeing even larger disparities in who's missing instructional time. And we know, for example, from research on chronic absenteeism, that missing 3 or more days of school before taking the 4th grade reading test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress test, lowered students' achievement after adjusting for race and poverty and these other things, lowered achievement by a full grade level. So obviously missing instruction is harmful to achievement and will predict increased grade retention and a greater risk of dropping out. So it's really very counterproductive, but there's a lot of research now on what works instead. So first of all, problem solving and preventing behavior and thinking about how we structure our classrooms and the learning environment. So it's not about exposing kids more to disruptive peers, but actually reducing the level of disruption in the first place. And then effective responses. You know, most kids are good kids. They want to be in school. They want to please their teachers. All the research shows this. So we have to find different ways to help kids be successful. Some kids may have a disability, emotional behavioral disorder, for example, and may need a more restrictive placement. By that, I don't mean, you know, locked in a closet, but in a contained classroom with an educator who is trained to help kids with those kinds of needs. At the end of the day, principals, the teachers, they all have to understand what works better. And I know this as well as firsthand because I taught for 10 years. So I was that guy who kicked kids out of the school right and left when I started teaching. And I also got training and saw that there's a much more effective way.
So you understand what he was saying about suspensions. Removing students from the classroom means they are not being taught. They are not getting those lessons. And what do you think happens? Do they come back in and they're back on track? Anybody want to talk about that?
I feel like that once a kid gets suspended, it continues. Like that behavior continues. They don't want to go to school anymore because once that happens, they don't really care anymore. So keeping kids in school, helping them learn, helping them get the education they need to be successful in life is most important, rather than kicking them out. So that's how I feel.
Thank you very much for sharing that. We actually heard from other students as part of NPT's American Graduate Project. We talk to students often who are struggling to stay in school. And one of the things that does come up quite frequently is having recurring suspensions and expulsions, and not always for the reasons you think. We have a video to show you of some of those students.
I thought I was a good kid. It was just the attitude, you know, that was the main problem.
Students at risk of not graduating have shared their challenges with NPT as part of our American Graduate Series. For many students of color and those with disabilities, failing starts with a suspension or expulsion, often for minor offenses.
I acted out in class, but I got my work done. But I'm not a bad person. I just did it because I had no one there. My father was in prison. My mother was dead. I felt like what else could go wrong? Nothing else could go wrong. So I acted out just for attention.
I have a learning disability, so I had to work 10 times harder than like a regular kid to like understand it. And like some teachers don't understand my learning disability. I felt judged because like I didn't know like the stuff like then and there, and they expect me to know it, but I really didn't know it.
Call me a wetback, I'm fighting. Call me a beaner, I'm fighting. Middle school, I got fairly good grades, but I still kept on getting rolled up. The grades don't mean nothing when you're getting rolled up, you know.
One time I was in the hallway, I say about 3 minutes after the bell, when they were supposed to be in class. Principal seen me in the hallway, and I had 17 referrals, so they put me out. When you get put out, you gotta wait a couple weeks. That's how you fall behind in your grades.
So those kids who are being suspended for those non-criminal kinds of offenses, they go home for a couple of days. They miss valuable school time. They come back. They've learned nothing about how to repair the harm or even to change. Plus, they're mad at the teacher. The teacher's probably not feeling really great about them either. They come back, probably gonna do something else. And then that kid is out of school. And the loss of academic time there is insurmountable.
So how important is this in terms of impacting the graduation rate that we're all, you know, striving to improve, and we want kids to stay in school? Yes.
My name is Carrie Mason. I'm with the Education Rights Project in the Metro Public Defender's Office, where we work to attach kids to their school environments and hopefully reduce their contact with juvenile justice. And I think it's very human to want to punish, but we do know that kids that are suspended and expelled from school are more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system. They're more likely to end up on the wrong side of the system, and they're less likely to graduate from high school. And I think that we have an obligation as folks involved in education to take a broader view and think about what our end game is. And we do know that attachment to school is one of the best predictors of high school graduation. We know these things. I mean, these are the things that the evidence has borne out. And it's our obligation to kind of get under that and attach kids and help them get to that high school graduation. And if they get there, we know their outcomes, their life outcomes are so much more improved.
Okay. Has anyone, do you want to say something? Yes.
My name is Franklin Willis. I'm a music teacher here in Nashville. I think a major component that we're missing is the teacher preparation programs. I've had several teachers that I'm mentoring who have done a lot of their student teaching in the ideal situation out in the suburbs, and then their first job is in the inner city, and they don't know how to connect with kids. They don't know how to meet them where they are. Culturally relevant teaching is a big buzzword right now. Meeting kids where they are and accepting them for who they are. I think that big component there is missing, and I think we need to start back with our teachers, accepting our kids, and then moving forward. Because if Johnny does something, oh, I'm gonna work with him. But if John Quez does something, then we automatically have these, you know, these perceived notions that, oh, he's gonna be a troublemaker, he's this, he's that. So how do we begin those conversations and give our teachers who want to be teachers, our young people who want to be teachers, but give them ideal environments in their student teaching so they can see that this is what you'll be walking into day one.
That's an excellent point, and it's kind of surprising the reasons students are suspended. These are first-time offenses. Again, we're just looking at black and white students, so black is the blue. Cell phone, having a cell phone in school, suspendable offense. Dress code, disruptive behavior, that could be a range of things. Display of affection. Are you surprised at the types of things that are leading to suspensions for students?
with cell phones, I really never get in trouble with my cell phone. But like, you know, if they tell you to put it up, you don't put it up, you can probably get, they'll be like, okay, I'll write you up. And then like, you'll probably get suspended. Or like, well, we have like, not ISS, but like Saturday school and like, you know, lunch detention, all that type of stuff. But
you're still not in the regular classroom if you get sent to those, correct?
Right.
Okay.
You can get sent out for a cell phone. That can be under disruption, actually. That can be called a disruption, having your cell phone. Even if it's like not making noise or doing anything, it could be disruptive.
Do all the students, are all the students aware of that being a potential reason to be suspended? So it's fairly common?
At our school, we have a lot of people with cell phones out. A lot of people push the dress code a whole lot. So I feel like at our school, our problem is both cell phone and dress code, but I feel like it's more of dress code. Because us girls, you know, we like to wear our skirts, we like to wear our dresses and our tank tops and stuff. But we always get in trouble. And we know that we can get in trouble with it, but we like to push it anyways because if girls want to look pretty, we can't help it. We want to feel good about ourselves. Can't help.
Okay. I mean, does it surprise anyone besides me that students are getting suspended for some of these reasons? Is anybody else kind of surprised by that?
This really reflects what state and national trends are. Most suspensions and expulsions, and especially zero tolerance offenses, are for nonviolent reasons. Zero tolerance was developed with violence and bringing guns to school, selling drugs, using drugs at school, and we've done really well across the state with reducing the number of zero tolerance offenses, true zero tolerance offenses. But our suspensions and expulsions are for nonviolent reasons for those that you're talking about. And the other thing that I think we need to take into consideration, especially not only in our state but in the country as well, is about ACEs, our adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed care. So what we're trying to do is ask teachers, again, what this gentleman said about teacher prep is so far behind getting teachers ready for what they're actually going to encounter in the classroom. So we need to really focus our teacher prep efforts more about making a new lens to look at education and to look at students, and it may be more of a trauma-informed lens that we look at what students are going through and how we can best serve them.
In this case, also, a lot of folks will say, well, maybe, you know, the black students had misbehaved more, but in this case, these are all first-time offenders. And in fact, most of the first-time offenders for both groups, you know, more than 50% were not suspended. But of the first-time offenders, this shows the difference in suspension rates. So this is about
similar
treating similar students
in similar
differently.
situations for similar behavior.
Right, treated vastly differently.
And what does that speak to?
Well, it speaks to racial discrimination. But there's also a more subtle form of discrimination that creeps into the perceptions of behavior. So we see the largest racial disparities in the most vague categories, like disruption or didn't obey an administrative directive. The kinds of things that, as a gentleman earlier stated, are informed by differences in perceptions of the behavior in the first place. And there's a new study from Yale's Child Study Center that even preschool teachers, when prompted to, they saw pictures of four different students, a black boy, a white boy, black girl, white girl, on a screen. And they were said, oh, these students are about to misbehave. Can you see the signs? Well, none of them were misbehaving, so it was a ruse. But all the eyes went to, guess who? Black boys. This starts in preschool. So over many years, students become aware that the system's not fair, that they're not being treated, that they're being watched more closely than other students and being, you know,
and they carry
flagged.
that
Right.
record too with them.
That's right.
From preschool.
Right. Yeah.
Does that surprise anyone that preschool there are preschoolers being suspended? I don't understand that. I saw someone with a hand up. Yes.
Hi, I'm Diana White, and I go to Hillsborough High School, and I'm on the restorative practice team. And we had a training, and there was a video we watched, and it was about how the preschool teachers were starting early with restorative practices and how they wanted to ingrain in them, this is how you're supposed to be treated. And they were taking that from middle school to high school to help them. And like, I think this was in California. So they were taking this to help them and later in life, instead of like, they wouldn't get suspended, they would talk about their problems. Because if you get suspended from school, you're like, why do I want to come back to your school if I'm being suspended and I'm being treated like this? But instead they would talk to the preschoolers and say, hey, this is not what we're supposed to do. How can I help you and support you? And I think that's a big thing that the school should do.
Okay. Let's, since you've introduced the Peace Team, which is a very, very cool concept that Glencliff has, and Hillsborough as well is now doing this. We have a video of a training for some students who are on the Peace Team. I want to show you that, and then we want to talk about some of the strategies that they are using. These high school students are doing their homework. The assignment? Finding better ways to handle conflicts and disciplinary matters in their school as part of the Peace Team. It's the brainchild of Glencliff High School teacher Laura Fitz, a champion of restorative discipline practices.
The way we've designed the Peace Team is for those students to investigate the social problems in which they live and then be equipped to address and to solve those problems. When someone does something that's perceived as being a bad behavior, typically that person is cast out. So that could be that they're cast out of the room for a little bit, they might go to in-school suspension. And so restorative practices, instead of excluding people, wants to bring them back in to solve the problems.
Fitz says the Peace Team is making a difference in real-life school situations.
I have teachers come up to me and share stories of things that the Peace Team has done. They've worked with teachers to implement pieces of restorative practices in their classroom. They've been called in to mediate conflicts. They've mentored students.
And the benefits are mutual for some Peace Team students, even as they move beyond high school.
I want to take this with me to college and like to my workplace where I can connect with people, trust people, and like be there for people and people also be there for me.
I'm going to get you to stand up and tell us how this approach is working at Glencliff. And you started this, so I want to hear from you. Do these students actually intercede in classrooms and in the hallways?
We're in our second year of the Peace Team, and it's been really beautiful and inspirational to see how our students not only are leading restorative practices within themselves and within other students, but also with teachers. And so some of our students are mentoring teachers. Teachers will come to me and say, hey, I'm having a problem with my 4B class. And we'll have students that speak the same language of the folks who are in that classroom go to that class and help the teacher. So planning how that class session will go, helping the teacher facilitate that session, and then they've done some data as well with pre-surveys with the teachers and with the students, and then post-surveys to kind of gauge the effectiveness. And so they're mentoring.
What has that shown?
That has been really helpful. And so we have a lot of qualitative data at this point, and so teachers are reporting that they feel really comfortable having students help them do this new paradigm shift within their classrooms. And the students also indicate that they really like working with other students and seeing how things can be done differently.
Any of the students want to share what it's like to turn the tables and you're mentoring your teachers? Yeah, yes. Since you're an alumni, you could tell us.
It feels nice, man, because like, you got to understand that teachers are humans too, and like that they need help as much as we need help. So when I remember last year we came in, it was this teacher that was having a problem with her students. She was an ELA teacher, and she couldn't really connect to her students. And with Cecilia, she's one of our Peace Team members. She's really great at talking to other kids and being there for other kids, and they was really good at talking to them and helping them. So I feel like it's very effective.
Great. I think you wanted to say something too about that.
My name is Michael Witherspoon, and I'm a member of the Peace Team at Glencliff High School. And it's pretty cool to see how welcoming the other students are, because it's like they understand, and no one understands how they feel like we do because we are students.
I want to hear from someone who can tell us about restorative practices before we get too far into this, because there are people watching this who really don't know that term and know what it means.
If I were to just quantify restorative in 3 things, I would say it is about community building, it's about relationships, and it's about accountability. One of the things, and that speaks directly to the whole idea of discipline and punishment. It's not about punishment, it's about accountability. We have to teach our kids that when they do things that are wrong, that they have to repair that harm. You know, they have to make it right in some kind of way. And the only way you can do that is to have conversations around that, and then accountability around that issue, you know, in that community. So if you believe in your community and you support your community and you've done wrong by it, then you want to fix it. You know, but that calls for having those relationships. And one of the things I know for adults, a lot of times, you know, probably everybody in this room is at different levels of their ability to build relationships. And so that's why training is so important for teachers, which several people have spoken to, because we all are coming at it from different places with those biases, and also our ability to just be vulnerable with our kids. And we know that from the work of the Peace Team and the Core Team, that if we can be vulnerable with our kids, if we can listen to our kids. And so with restorative, the other part of those 3 things that I talked about is having student voice. You know, the things you had up on there about cell phone and all of that, that's the world they live in. My children, their phone is connected to the end of their hand at all times. And so if we don't, as an adult community, understand that this is where kids are right now. And so
in that case, excuse me for interrupting, but maybe give us a practical example. Maybe the students have a say in the cell phone. Tell us what you mean.
Absolutely. When we work with schools, we sit down and with their leadership team, and that leadership team should include students. You know,
to help set
rules. And we look at that discipline. If their #1 offense is cell phones, then we got to have voice around kids around that voice, kids around that part of it. You know, around that offense. Because if not, you know, I'm old. I can't tell them, you know, exactly what they should do and how we can negotiate that. But one thing I can say for sure, in any of those discipline practices, it's a negotiation with kids nowadays. It's not coming in and saying this is it, right? It's about helping them to understand, you know, contrition. We want them to do the right thing because they feel and understand that it's the right thing to do. I want to do that, right? And so that's what restorative practices tries to do, move into buildings and through conversations and interactions with people, build that sense of we want to do the right thing because we know it's the right thing, which makes for better adults in the world.
And I know Lorraine has been working on this for years, and it is clear to me that it's not something you can just throw into a school and say, here, do it. And look, as we started, the world around us has not done anything that I think we would describe as restorative in terms of how we deal with each other. So where are we with this strategy for discipline? And what's being done to get the framework in place? Because we're talking about changing mindsets, attitudes, and even, as we described earlier, cultural and historical factors. Where are we with this? Yes, ma'am, in the blue.
I'm Phyllis Sells, and I'm with NOAA, Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. It's a group of 65 congregations in Nashville, labor unions, concerned about bringing Nashville to a more just situation for everyone. We've been concerned about the racial disparities and the expulsions of our kids for a couple of years, and we've been working with Metro Schools, with Passages, with other folks to try to look at how we can't expect the schools to do everything. We've got to have parents and the community working along with the schools. And so our job is to engage the community and engage parents. And many of us have been trained in restorative practices under Lorraine, and we realize what a wonderful program it is when it's done with the right amount of staff, when a school buys into it. It can do a lot of restoring of relationships, repairing harm. Kids don't have to be suspended. We teach, you know, reading, we teach math, but we don't teach good behavior. We punish it, and that doesn't make any sense. We can't expect the schools. Parents have to be responsible for helping their kids make good choices. The community has to take care of a family that may be in deep trouble, and a church could help that family in many ways that would affect the child's behavior in school.
Let's not forget that the only place left that everything shows up is school. Because people don't go to church anymore. And I know that may offend some of the pastors in the room, but you'd like to have a broader audience on Sunday, because we've kind of discounted that as a viable option in our communities. So everything that a teacher is asked to do is much broader than they were ever educated to do. And none of it is what they're measured on. So I want to be fair, and this is a lifelong being in education, so there's this disconnect. So I mean, I want teachers to treat kids fairly, and one of the ways you start is by having that expectation of them, by looking at a young person through a strength-based lens, by looking at them through the understanding that, no, I'm not wanting to move you away from me, I actually want more time with you. And for a lot of kids, they felt like that was the punishment, is that they had to spend more time with me. And one more story, really? That kind of thing.
Just suspend me already.
Yeah, please, send me home, yes. But the truth of the matter is that's where the relationship was built.
Thank you. And you also mentioned that this can't just be done in the schools. And I know we have some people here who are with law enforcement as well as the juvenile courts.
My concern is with the cradle to prison pipeline. Cradle starts with a significant sexual, physical, mental abuse of children from the cradle onward. That's where it starts. My history as a prison chaplain since 1968 has to see this in its worst forms. The other part is the prison from school to pipeline because of suspensions. We've got to stop that pipeline because it just goes on, and it is perpetuated by the offenders and by the system itself. So prisons become a recycling center. So it happens over and over again. But the basic way to stop filling our prisons with mass incarceration, which is disproportionately directed toward people of color, is to stop it before they get there.
I am Sheila Calloway, and I am the juvenile court judge, and we are very interested in working with the school system, with the community at large, to make a difference for our children. It is so true what Ms. Sells was just saying. We don't teach our children how to resolve conflicts, yet we want to punish them for not knowing how to do it. And so we are happy with the efforts that Passage is doing, and we are happy to participate as well. What I see every day when I see the children who get suspended, who get disengaged with school, who are home on suspension with no one to watch them and no one to care for them, end up in front of me in juvenile court. And we have got to stop that cycle. And so we as an entire community are responsible for teaching our children. I will say, go back to what Ben Jordan was saying earlier, we got to call it what it is. We have a system, including our criminal justice system, that operates on punishing and incarceration. We lead the entire world in incarceration, and we incarcerate minorities at an extremely high rate. And we do it, it's an intentional system that does it. And until we start to ask the questions of who was harmed, how do we fix that harm, instead of who did it and how can we punish them, we're not going to make a difference. And if we can't make a difference in our community and in our incarceration, our criminal justice system, we can't make the school systems do it. It's a community thing, and we have to make a difference.
I do have to raise a concern that some of our viewers may be thinking, because clearly this is not easy work. And there are teachers, I have a quote from a teachers association elsewhere, that we still got to have some way to deal with violence in the schools. Teachers are still being assaulted. So how do you reconcile, or students are being assaulted, or whatever the violent offense may be. So how do you reconcile bringing in this more emotional, social awareness component and restorative component with real need for strong punishment? And I see you with your hand up.
I am a former classroom teacher, and I actually began teaching as a sub in a very high need area because, and this was 10 years ago, and it was chaos. But what I learned was our kids come from chaos and expect our schools to be a safe place. And then when the schools mimic the chaos that they come from, it's just like, all right, so this is just like my neighborhood. I was talking to those kids one day, and one thing they told me, and it broke my heart because I had a son the exact same age with a different educational experience, is they told me, well, people have always told us we were dumb. That floored me. And I was like, wait a minute. See, your behavior is less than desirable, but you're not dumb. And so what that said was the kids reacted to the expectation that was put in place, and it was none. They were never expected to learn. They were never expected to behave. And began
Can you tell
to
us
teach
practically
them.
one or two things you did?
Ooh, on camera?
For this discussion, yes.
Well, one of the things that I did was I would shut my door and lock it and have a frank conversation, very frank. For my very last activity for these kids, I brought my cap and gown in, I brought my degree in, and I took a picture of all of these kids in my cap and gown and degree. I had these kids write a story about what were you gonna do past high school, not 7th grade, past high school, because I wanted them to future think. And at the very end of that year, I mounted that essay and a picture on a large piece of construction paper and gave it to every last one of them at the end of the year as their award, end of the year awards. Instead of giving it to one or two, I gave it to every kid. And those kids said, you loved us. You really loved us. They don't get that. We don't empower our kids. We don't show them empathy. We're not transparent as adults. We have all made mistakes. Culture has changed, and our kids need to feel empowered that if I make a mistake, you're not gonna punish me to the hilt that I can't recover, but you're gonna empower me to do better, but you're gonna be transparent enough where I can see, yes, you really do care. And it goes back with teacher preparation. Sorry.
Thank you. Feel like we need the benediction now. But she did touch on something that we do want to deal with before this program ends, and that is what is being done in the schools to help with a trauma-focused approach and social-emotional learning.
The reality is we have to have a deeper conversation around the issue. We're still talking in generalities far too often. In our school system for the last 2 or 3 years, there's this huge misperception that we're talking about 40, 50,000 kids that are just out of control, disobedient. The reality is in the last 2 or 3 years, on average, 79 to 81% of our kids have never had a behavior incident or a discipline referral in school. So we're really talking about 20% of our kids that are coming to school with some real issues.
And excuse me, if I'm not mistaken, suspensions have gone down significantly in metro schools.
Suspensions are decreasing. Last year we decreased overall suspensions by about 2.3, 2.4%, but the disparity does still exist.
Okay.
So the racial disparity is there, but it is improving. What we've done as a system is implementing a district-wide, what we're calling MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. Whereas a district, we've adopted PBIS, restorative practices, and SEL foundations.
PBIS is?
Oh, somebody help me out. There we go. I always say it wrong.
And the other acronym for our viewers?
Social and Emotional Learning
SEL.
Foundations course and restorative practices. So we as a district have the capacity to provide the ongoing support and training for those 3 models.
Okay.
So our schools for the first year had to select one of those 3 as their tier 1, their school-wide management plan. That's the first time we've done this in our school system.
They had to choose one of those
They
approaches.
had to choose one, and then begin the process of training administrators, training teachers, and then training faculty or students and parents to get them more involved in the work. But at the end of the day, it's still about the relationships and the consistency of implementation. Until we get to that space, where all of our adults and kids understand the expectations, understand the relationships that are necessary for them to be successful, and our parents and community members have that same understanding and work in partnership with the school, we're still working in a silo. So when we work more collaboratively, we'll start to see this issue change over time.
I feel like that kids act out because they feel like y'all said, a lot of us feel like they don't care. And I like what she said about relationships. If I feel like somebody cares, I'm going to like open up to them, and I will act different because I know that they actually care. But if I feel like if I say, for instance, like I've not always had the best pass. I haven't always been that starlight student and that just good in school. But I feel like what opened up to me is when they asked me to be on the restorative practices team, because I feel like people kind of brush you off when you have a past. And I feel like, and it really opened my heart, and it really broadened my day when they asked me to be on their restorative practices team, because I felt like somebody cared about me. They saw a future in my life.
Were you skeptical?
Did you know that? No. Honestly, before I went to the training during the summer, I didn't know about restorative practices.
Okay.
But now I have a clear understanding what restorative practices mean. It's about building relationships with, I think one of the ladies over here said, it's about building relationships, about building a positive culture in our community. And it's just, bringing everybody together and getting to the root of the problem and changing the root of the problem.
One final thing, and I know we're at an hour, but this is important for our viewers, because there's John Doe sitting at home who doesn't have a child in the school system, isn't a teacher, and is wondering why he needs to be concerned about this.
The reason I think it's important is because we failed to deal with the fact that our public school system dealt with a generation of failing young people. And there's plenty of those parents who are sending their kids to school who do not have the confidence, who do not have the relationship. And if there is a way that we're going to have to restore our community back to a place of saneness, it's going to be our young people leading us. And they have to have those opportunities to practice the restorative so that they can come back. It is hard now to go back home and to tell a parent who went to schools where they were kicked out, where they were misused, where they were abused, where they asked the question first, who kicked you out of school? If it was somebody that they knew, that they trusted, that was all right. But oftentimes, if it was a person of a different race, different sexual orientation, who administered that, it was automatically wrong. So now we have an opportunity in our community to invest in our young people so that they can come back. And so hopefully we can break the cycle. So we're not just talking about restoring what's happening in our schools. What we really are talking about is restoring what's happening in our communities.
We've looked nationally as well as in several states where students were tracked in Florida for 6 years, in Texas for 7 years, in California for 3 years, different levels of high school. We found that getting suspended from school, the degree that suspensions alone contribute to a lower graduation rate was approximately 6 to 7 percentage points from just one cohort. And using research from economists, Clive Belfield and others, these are award-winning economists who've looked at the impact of not getting that diploma. That translates into $35 billion in lifetime costs for just one cohort of students. So there's a tremendous amount of tax dollars that's wasted when we don't use research and we focus on punishment instead of problem solving that can be averted.
From a cost perspective, in the state of Tennessee presently, it is $9,200 annually to educate a child. If we fail collectively as a community to provide their child with the resources they need, it starts off at $32,000 a year for incarceration. As a supervisor, I can tell you that if we do not prepare our young people, 3 of the major infractions, even on my job today, are cell phones, dress code, and how to effectively resolve conflict.
Okay.
So what I always challenge everyone, because I hear oftentimes, well, I don't have any kids in metro schools, or I'm a grandparent, or my kids live in another state. Through your activity or your inactivity, we all make a conscious decision to either contribute to our students being the next generation of success stories or statistics. I'm for success stories.
I want to thank all of you for joining us today and for participating in this discussion. Thanks to those at home who are watching this discussion about school discipline. We want to hear your thoughts. You can share comments by emailing us at tv8@wnpt.org. And we encourage you to learn more about NPT's American Graduate Series by visiting our website, wnpt.org/American Graduate. Thanks for joining us.